but it's a political problem. What I was told is essentially now politics are such that you have to make a pledge, at least one of two pledges. And that pledge is, I pledge not to raise your taxes.
Right.
And or I pledge not to cut your benefits.
Two promises, that's it. Sounds so familiar and innocent, right? They're the things we're used to hearing from politicians, maybe even the things we want to hear. But what if I told you that these two simple promises are the keys to a political paralysis that is slowly, quietly driving the United States toward a predictable and dangerous financial cliff? In this video, I'm not going to give you a boring economics lecture. Instead, let's figure this out together. This is going to be a journey of discovery. We're going to use this detailed infographic as our roadmap. And step by step, we will follow the analysis of billionaire investor Ray Dalio. We'll see the economic plaque he talks about building up in our nation's arteries. We will witness how these two promises killed the last best chance for a cure, a plan called Bowles-Simpson. And finally, we will arrive at a stark crossroads where we must confront the two futures history has laid out for us, the success story of Sweden or the endless tragedy of Argentina. By the end of this journey, you will see American politics not just as a fight between left and right, but as an urgent math problem that we are all failing to solve. Ready? Let's begin our journey.
The economics of a country are the same as the economics of an individual or the economics of a country, of a company, except the government can print money and take money by taxes. So let's look at that. What we have is we're spending $7 trillion a year this year. We'll spend $7 trillion. We'll take in $5. So we're spending 40% more money than we're taking in. And we've accumulated a debt that's 6 times the amount of the money that we're taking in.
First, let's diagnose the illness. Let's look at the first section of our map titled The Core Problem. To make sense of this, Dalio suggests we think of the economy like a human body, which is a brilliant analogy because it makes this all feel personal. In this body, the government, which sets financial policy and laws, is the brain. The central bank, or the Fed, is the heart, pumping the lifeblood of money and credit through the system. And that lifeblood is what fuels all economic activity. In a healthy system, this blood flows to productive investments and generates income. But our system has been unhealthy for a long time. It's been feeding on debt. And that has a consequence: plaque. This plaque is the interest we pay on our past borrowing. And just like real plaque that clogs your arteries and strains your heart, this financial plaque is clogging our economy. So, what's the real-world cost of this plaque? Looking at the vital signs on our infographic, the numbers are truly staggering. In fiscal year 2024, the US government spent around $6.8 trillion, but only took in about $4.9 trillion in revenue. That means we're spending roughly 40% more than we earn every single year. This creates a massive annual deficit of nearly $2 trillion. And here's the most painful part of that plaque. The interest payments alone now cost over $880 billion a year. That number is bigger than the entire US defense budget. Let that sink in. The money that could be going to the roads in your city, to your children's schools, to the scientific research that will shape the future, can't. It's all being used to pay for the borrowing of our past. We are sacrificing our future to finance our past. So, if the diagnosis is this clear, if the bleeding is this obvious, why can't the brain, the government, stop it? This question takes us out of the cold world of economics and into the messy, passionate world of politics and human psychology.
It's a political problem. I was in Washington speaking to members of Congress on both sides, and Senate and the House. And pretty much everybody agrees on the supply, demand, and the issue. But it's a political problem. What I was told is essentially now politics are such that you have to make a pledge, at least one of two pledges. And that pledge is, I pledge not to raise your taxes.
Right.
And or I pledge not to cut your benefits. And with those pledges, those political pledges, and both sides exerting a lot of pressure to do that, there's not going to be a resolution of that unless there's some bipartisan commission or something that might happen later, but unlikely, I don't think.
Dalio's diagnosis that the two pledges create a fatal political gridlock isn't just a theory. It was tested in the real world with disastrous results. Now, I want to take you on a short but incredibly important journey into recent history, the dramatic story of the Bowles-Simpson Commission. This is the story of a plan that could have saved the country and how it was killed by political ambition. In 2010, with the country still reeling from the financial crisis and the national debt soaring, President Obama established a bipartisan commission to find a solution. It was led by two respected figures, Erskine Bowles, a Democrat, and Simpson, a Republican. Their mission was simple but monumental: create a plan to put the nation's budget on a sustainable path. To pass, the plan needed a supermajority. 14 of the 18 commission members had to vote yes. After months of work, they released their report titled The Moment of Truth. The plan was a masterpiece of compromise, a true lesson in shared sacrifice. It called for nearly $4 trillion in savings, carefully balanced, with about $2 in spending cuts for every $1 in tax increases. When you look at the details, you see how brave it was. It proposed lowering tax rates for the rich, but also closing the popular mortgage interest deduction. It suggested gradually raising the retirement age to 69 by the year 2075, but also making Social Security more generous for low-income seniors. In short, it had something for everyone to hate, but it was what the country needed. As co-chairman Simpson later said, everyone had a sacred cow in that room. Everyone wanted the cuts to come from someone else's sacred cow. So what happened? The plan failed. It only got 11 of the 14 votes it needed. And when you look at why, it's crystal clear. It failed because it asked politicians to break their two sacred promises. Key Republicans like Paul Ryan voted no because it included tax increases, no matter how many spending cuts were attached. For them, the no new taxes pledge was more important than the nation's fiscal health. On the other side, key Democrats like Jan Schakowsky voted no because it made tiny changes to Social Security and Medicare. For them, the no entitlement cuts pledge was more important than the mathematical reality. The two pledges won. America lost. And that day, the theory of political paralysis was proven to be a hard, cold fact. Let's just pause for a second. I know these topics are complex, detailed, and honestly, a little overwhelming. Bringing all of this information together, all these numbers, historical events, and political analyses, and turning it into a story that makes sense truly takes a huge amount of passion and effort. If you feel that what we've shared so far has given you any value, if it's offered you a new perspective on what's happening, the best way you can support that effort is by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support is the fuel that allows us to keep creating this kind of in-depth content. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, let's get back to the most important part of our story, the crossroads we're at today.
There are things that can be done, but it's politics that's standing in the way. If right now the budget deficit is about 7% of GDP, it can be cut to about 4% of GDP, 3 or 4%. So there's an ability to do that. But in order to do that, it has to come from a little bit of everything. It has to come from a little bit of taxes, a little bit, about 4% increase in taxes, essentially, 4% decrease in spending. And if that's done, then there will be the equivalent of an interest rate cut, and that'll be balanced. If we don't do that, we are going to have a supply-demand problem. And one can see that, like a doctor looking at that plaque in the system, you can see that. Well, it's correct that the tariffs, if done correctly, will bring in a significant amount of tax revenue. I would estimate about $300 billion a year, and over 10 years, that's $3 trillion, and that's significant. And part of that is also paid for by the foreigners who are exporting. There's some merit to that. But we have a problem nonetheless in terms of this supply-demand situation. It's not going to be enough to deal with that situation.
The little bit of everything formula that Dalio proposes, this balanced approach where everyone shares the pain, brings us to our final destination, a historical crossroads. Ahead of us lie two very real paths, forged by the choices of other nations that stood where we stand today. On one side, there is the Argentine trap. This is the path for those who can't overcome political gridlock, who choose easy, unsustainable solutions. Argentina has been trapped on this path for decades. It's a devastating cycle of debt, crisis, and default. The country has defaulted on its debt 9 times since 1816. During their devastating Corralito crisis in 2001, the government froze people's bank accounts overnight. Ordinary people, teachers, shopkeepers, retirees, poured into the streets, banging pots and pans, screaming that their life savings had been stolen. This is the path of endless instability and stolen hope. On the other side, there is the Swedish model. This is the path of courage and political maturity. In the early 1990s, Sweden faced its own deep crisis. A property bubble burst, major banks collapsed, unemployment shot up from 2% to over 10%. and their deficit exceeded 10% of GDP. But they didn't choose the easy path. They implemented a tough but realistic plan called the Person Plan. They cut spending and raised taxes. They reformed their most sensitive programs like pensions. It was painful in the short term, but it saved their country. Within 4 years, their budget was balanced, and they entered 2 decades of stability and prosperity. The choice between the path of Sweden and the path of Argentina is not made by economists. It's made by citizens and the leaders they elect. The problem is clear. The solution, while politically difficult, is mathematically possible. The choice is ours. So, how can a country having this much debt suddenly become a threat to our freedom? Sounds a little weird, right? But that's exactly what Ray Dalio means when he warns that this whole debt issue is now a national security threat. In the next video, that's exactly what we get into. When the economy goes bad and politicians can't find a solution, how do people start saying enough is enough? Just get someone in here to fix this. You can see that entire process step by step by watching that video. If you're curious, all you have to do is click the screen to continue. See you there, and thanks so much for watching.